And until the end of the month, if you donate $50 and put your address in there, you will get a 1 ounce bar of silver. I mean, you can't beat that. What do you think, Mark? You think that's a good deal?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
I wish I was getting the silver donated to me.
Yeah, it's any little bit of investments help with this economy.
Oh, definitely. I mean, half of that $50 donation would go right back to the person with the, the cost of the silver and then the shipping and handling and stuff.
Yeah. What happened to Spring?
We didn't have one.
It's guess those chemtrails are being effective.
We don't usually have it. Our spring lasts 3 days here.
All right. Well, yeah, I just wanted to get into a couple quick announcements before we bring our guests on. I just hope that Tasha and Brittany, the pistachio girls at Respecs, didn't doze off like they did last week before the show started. So I hope they're awake and enjoying the start of the show. And also wanted to...
Wait a minute. We're putting pistachio sellers to sleep?
I don't know what happened last week. They were all excited to tune in, and they
were they all wore out from the week before you dancing with them?
Yeah, maybe that or the kids. I don't know what happened, but I just wanted give Tasha and Brittany a wake up call and tell them they better be tuned in. I'll ask them about it tomorrow, and I also wanted to. Tell Charlie that regret that we ran out of time. I cherish the time that we did share, and thanks for opening so many doors for me. So, and with that out of the way, just wanted to introduce our guest. This is the long-awaited and Jan Summers is our first hour guest, and she's going to be discussing working in Egypt. So I'm excited about this. She has an impressive resume. She's done work in the Hudson Valley rock shelters, worked at the Duchess Quarry Caves, and excavated a mastodon. That sounds really cool. She also works at the Orma J. Smith Museum at the College of Idaho. Some of her writings can be found in Ancient American Magazine, and she has an article in the current edition, number 110, and it's about the Zuni culture. And she also has an article in 108 about a summary of her trip to Luxor. So, and she's been researching King Tut's tombs. That's a hot topic right now. So, welcome, Jan Summers. How are you tonight?
Fine, Mark. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, great. So, Jan, you have a lot of exciting information to tell us about actually being there, working in Egypt. News all over social media is about this hidden chamber. Please give us a little bit of the topography of the area. Where is this located? How far is it from the Nile? Just a little background material there.
Sure. Well, since the end of last summer, basically the world has been on edge about a new theory about the world's most famous tomb, which is KB62, the tomb of Tutankhamun. Now, KB means Valley of the Kings or King's Valley, and 62 is the number of tombs that were discovered up to that point. They sit in the Valley of the Kings, which is also called Valley of the Gates of the Kings, and it's on the west bank of Luxor, Egypt. You cross the Nile, and about 2 miles in, you come to the desert environment, and you come to the burial necropolis of all of the kings of the 16th to 11th century BC tombs that were constructed for the pharaohs and the important nobles of Egypt's new kingdom. And in particular, what we're dealing with in KV62 is Dynasty 18. Now, Dynasty 18 is famous because that's the dynasty that the young pharaoh Tutankhamun is from, and all of his ancestors originate from that and go forward. So if you want to know more about the Valley of the Kings, it's basically a burial necropolis. It is where we go to work on various tombs, and we stay there for the excavation season, and myself as an archaeologist and Egyptologist, and many people come along to study the tomb, ceramicists, surveyors, anybody that's needed in order to document the tomb, and we're finding a lot of tombs that are being hidden. But the topic tonight is the KV62 one, because it's in the news every day. It's on Facebook every day. And this is because back in the summer, when I had finished my work there, I was standing in the tomb in front of the mummy of Tutankhamun and feeling very awed because I had never seen him actually lying in his tomb before. And after I left the tomb and came back to the U.S., a big announcement was made by British Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves that there's a new theory that there might be rooms beneath the tomb. Well, to me, that's great news because archaeologically that would give us some interest as to why was this done and why were only certain rooms of the tomb used. However, his theory goes further, and he's showing some good proof that Nefertiti, the most famous queen in Egypt, may be buried beneath Tutankhamun. So this is history-making news for Egyptologists and anyone that studied this tomb. And it's kind of gone on from there day after day with new revelations of what's happening. But I'm glad to say that the Antiquities Minister, who's in charge of all of the tombs in Egypt, has decided to make this a professional committee study and not rush into it after doing all of the GPR and remote sensing of the tomb. So we're kind of taking our time. We want to find what is there and how significant it is, and it could be probably the most significant thing since 1922 when Howard Carter discovered the tomb.
Now, is there any kind of precedence that it's possible that there is a secret chamber there and possibly her remains?
Yes, we've so far they've done 4 different types of scans. And I was going to mention about when Howard Carter first began his excavations, the basic methods he used. Luckily, we see those artifacts today because he conserved them. He didn't have the technology that we have today. We're using GPR and infrared thermography, and we have been able to see that there are 2 vacant spaces behind 2 of the walls. Now, just to confirm this, the new Antiquities Minister is going even further and calling in more people. You know, they really want to be sure, which is pretty smart to do. But they're also picking up metallic objects behind one of the walls and something organic. Now, this is what the future will hold, is what is this and how are we going to actually see what is there?
Well, I kind of spoke the question. What I was meaning is where they've discovered, other chambers with other remains in them besides this one now.
Oh, in other tombs?
Yes, ma'am.
You mean in other tombs? No, not that I'm aware of. I mean, they have recently been doing scans and seeing that there are some anomalies in the pyramids. They've been doing this. When I was also there, they were doing that at Deshur. And they are finding it, but not to the extent of this particular tomb. And the reason this tomb is, of maybe more interest is because of this one fact, and I hope this is basically answering your question, is that this is the only tomb ever discovered so far that was basically left intact and was not robbed. Now, we do know that when it was closed up, the seals were broken twice, but when Carter discovered it after 10 years of digging in the Valley of the Kings, basically he found an intact tomb, and this is the only one. So if there are chambers beneath it, it's going to be quite phenomenal to see. And in my opinion, I'm not looking for treasure. If there are rooms behind it, this gives us a whole new scenario for us to think about why did they do this, and I think I can maybe explain some of that as well.
Okay, well, Jan, before we get to that, what does the entrance to the tomb look like?
Okay, well, the entrance to the tomb, of course, has been modernized and built up, and it has a stone wall around it. They usually use the limestone and from the local area. And then you walk down the stairs and into a corridor, and Tut's tomb in particular is small. It's 4 rooms, and this is basically one of the clues that gave us that it isn't really his tomb, because a pharaoh would be buried in a bigger tomb. So you walk down the stairs, and then you come to different chambers, annex, the treasury, burial chamber, storeroom, and then that's the tomb of KV 62, relatively small. However, when you first find a royal tomb, I mean, this is a rare thing. I will never do it in my lifetime, unfortunately, but on the doors you will see a famous royal seal of the jackal and 9 captives. And the seal is stamped on there by the ancient Egyptians, and if that seal's on there, the tomb has not been touched and it is royal. So that's quite extraordinary, and that's what Howard Carter found.
Wow, I didn't know that. So
Howard Carter, to me, I mean, is my idol as far as, what he did to conserve the tomb, because he was not an archaeologist trained. As you know, he was paid by Lord Carnarvon of Downton Abbey fame to go over and dig in Egypt, and at that time you could go dig anywhere you wanted to. No permits or security issues like we have today. Certainly.
Now, when Carter was there, did shifting sands cover the entrance, and he found it just by happenstance?
Well, what happens is that other excavations were taking place, and all the refuse and fill gets dumped on top. And this is what happened with his tomb. But luckily, it prevented the every 10-year floods from getting into the tomb and ruining all of the artifacts, which, can happen. But how Carter really found this, and this is something I wanted to mention today also for archaeologists, when we dig and we know where a tomb is, what you're looking at is past records. I mean, this goes back to the days of Napoleon, when 1799, when Belzoni discovered the marvelous tomb of Seti I, is that you don't always know what's there, but you look at past records, you have some hearsay from some of the old Egyptian reefs, who is the leader of the workers there. And these men were working in Egypt as young boys when KV-62 was found. So believe it or not, they have a lot of information. But we do use maps and, drawings and whatever to find things. But Carter had an idea after working 10 years nearby, because a few things were found in the sand, like a cup that had the hieroglyphics of Tutankhamun on it. And you have to think, gee, why was this found here? Maybe his tomb is nearby. And he got it in his mind, and he kept on until he actually knew that he was going to discover it, it seems. If you read, his book and many of the writings, he knew it was going to be there, and after 10 long years, he found it.
Okay. Did Carter have an idea that maybe there could be? It's almost like a split level tomb. Did he have?
Well, yeah, and what these scans turn out to be, it is. Although I think there's a slight difference in the flooring in the one section. But it very well could be. But that's another reason why we're thinking that it originally wasn't his tomb, because of what was happening in Egypt at the time. If I could tell you about Nefertiti and Akhenaten, because that may very well fit into this. Akhenaten was Tutankhamun's father, which has been verified by DNA. Now, DNA does not lie when all the LLs match like they did with that. So we know that his father was the heretic pharaoh who believed in only one God, the sun. And this was revolutionary because the Egyptian people believed in all the gods and deities. So what happened is either he was forced out or decided to move to Amarna, and he set up, his city there. However, I think probably him and Nefertiti, who was his wife, they had 6 daughters together. There is no mention of any son. I think they both probably fell out of favor, and something happened to Akhenaten and maybe Nefertiti. So Tutankhamun was 8 years old, so he became pharaoh of Egypt, and they brought him back to Memphis, which is the Valley of the Kings, to be buried. However, since he died young, they had to find a tomb for him. And it looks like that maybe this tomb was usurped and may originally have been Nefertiti's, because Nicholas Reeves, the Egyptologist I mentioned, has pretty well stated that, and it is clear, many of the artifacts found are for a woman in the tomb. There's family artifacts. It's a rather small tomb. It's not really built for a pharaoh. It's more for maybe a royal queen, and some other interesting things like that might tell us that why this tomb would have these extra rooms. Now, if the extra rooms, are vacant, it still would have been used. If the empty rooms contain Nefertiti, it would be quite amazing, but I have my own theory as to that. Who it may contain.
Jan, is there any hieroglyphs on the walls that would indicate that maybe another person was intended to be buried there?
Yes, that's a good question, because all of the walls recently were scanned, and we're seeing the pictures in an entirely new light. The hieroglyphics are usually from the Book of the Dead, and that's printed on every tomb that's in there, and it wants to welcome the deceased into the afterlife. The most important thing to the Egyptians, the afterlife, not the living life. These pictures are very scarce that are in KV62, so we think that it was done very quickly. There's nothing really on the walls, but when the scans were made, it seems that there may have been pictures and lines behind what's there. And so some of the images are being now reinterpreted as not Tutankhamun passing into the afterlife, but actually him helping Nefertiti into the afterlife. So that's a really crucial, important key also. However, if we discuss Nefertiti as his mother, this is where the big confusion and question comes in for everyone. The talks that I've given, this can be unclear to people, but I try to explain it in this way. Tutankhamun was found in KV62, and there was 2 female fetus mummies also found. DNA has proven by JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, those are his 2 daughters. So we don't know, we know who his wife was, but who is his mother? Now there's a mummy in the Cairo Museum that was found in a tomb called KV35, and she's referred to as Younger Lady 35. Her and 2 other mummies were found lying on boards, stripped of the wrappings, absolutely no name on the wrappings. Her DNA matches Tutankhamun. She's his mother. But she is sitting in the Cairo Museum. So is that Nefertiti, or is it another royal woman named Kia, or someone else? Perhaps one of his sisters. Incest was rampant. It isn't unusual for a young pharaoh to have children with one of his sisters and whatever. The idea was to keep the royal bloodline.
Right. Wasn't there some controversy about his death, and maybe that's why he had the smaller tomb than he would have normally had?
Well, the controversy about his death, we know pretty sure. I mean, he was not murdered. The medical report shows, and it is typical back then, there is very advanced malaria. And also he had a very bad necrosis of the leg, which showed in the mummy. And we do have tomb images of him leaning on a lot of staffs and sticks, and you can see them in the museums. So as an 18-year-old, he was pretty lame and damaged that way. Now, we think it could have been, hippos attacked the boats, and he liked to go out and do birding and fishing and whatever, and many of the paintings show that, him in the marshes. So from all indications, the mummy had nothing, on the head. So the mummy was pretty disintegrated from all of the unwrapping, because all of the resin had basically glued, the mummy to the wrappings, and then the gold sarcophagus and whatever. So I think that that theory pretty well be put down, that he was not murdered, that I believe anyway.
Well, that's good to hear anyways.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I mean, there was a big thing about it a few years back,
Yes, well, just like everything and of every topic, you have a lot of people pro and con against everything, and I try to present the facts so that people can see, well, gee, maybe that really was just the news. And my gosh, if you listen to the news, you could believe anything, right?
Well, everybody that opened King Tut's tomb died strangely, which that isn't true.
Yeah, well, yeah, some of it is true, though. Every time we go into
there were some pretty strange things, but, not all of them did.
People say that to me, and I said I would not care. I can't stay out of that tomb. Anyway, so let's see. Well, as far as you ask about the wall interpretations, and that's something that's being studied right now. Some new ideas of what's on the wall, and let's see. What I want to mention is that in the midst of all this, which is kind of typical when you work in Egypt, things get confused, and there's a lot of people doing a lot of things, as you can imagine, right? Because this is Egypt. And right in the middle of this entire thing, when Nicholas Reeves had the support of the Minister of Antiquities, and he's the one that said, go ahead, yes, let's go with this theory, because things were really put on hold with Zahi Hawass a lot, and then you had the revolution in 2011. But in the midst of all this, they decided to appoint a new antiquities minister. And this guy is a professor with, I think, a French education background, but he is all for, really investigating this stuff and finding the truth. So I'm totally, on board with that. I'd rather wait and find the real thing or nothing than make up a bunch of stories,
But there's more openness to research now after the revolution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that there is. I mean, after we recovered a lot of the artifacts that were stolen and damaged, and there's still a big international list, I think. We're always looking for antiquities, Even where I am, and here in the United States, I have people bring in things that you just never know what you're going to come across. I mean, you could go in Egypt and maybe have some dealer say, hey, this is authentic, and I'm good at telling, what is and what's not, though. So, but,
Jan, you were just mentioning was like one of the sisters or a relative. How many tombs do we not know where they are? We might know the person this pharaoh was around about between these years, but we haven't found his tomb. How many are unknown, or have all of them been found?
They say that there's more than has been found, and that would be quite phenomenal. But from this particular dynasty and era, which is very important in the chronology of Egyptology, we have found a lot of those tombs and those burials, and a lot of those artifacts are in the museums. I would say we know kind of what we're looking for, but if we're talking about Luxor, which is the Valley of the Kings, don't forget there's many other areas too, and some of them I've worked at. There's the Nile Delta region up at Mendes, which has a lot of undiscovered sites up there. There's also Saqqara, where I mentioned the Step Pyramid is. There's early pharaohs at Abydos, and then there's Amarna. So I would say there's a lot that have not been discovered yet. This particular 18th dynasty family, let me just say, there was Akhenaten, who has probably been found, his wife Nefertiti, which is the one in question, the 6 daughters. None of them have ever been discovered, and I had the feeling one of them actually might be in Tut's tomb. And then Akhenaten had other wives too, and one of those wives could very well be in the tomb and not Nefertiti, in my opinion also. And then there's all of the sisters. There's the grandfather, who is the pharaoh named Ai, who has an interesting tomb back in the Western Valley. And I always make a point to go there because many people think he could have been the one that maybe had something to do with the demise of this family. He was an older man, and when Tut died, apparently there's some hieroglyphic literature that shows that he did want to marry his young bride, Ankhesenamen. So his tomb is kind of interesting, and the last time I was in Egypt, I was lucky enough to hop on a motorbike and go back into the valley with one of the guards. And that's something that happens quite often, and to me that's just great when you can ride in the Valley of the Kings on the back of a motorbike going to a tomb. And when you get, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say that just sounds like a dream come true.
I know, I've been called Indiana Jan on that place before, but you know, it just kind of happens by chance, and I was very happy to get the ride back because on 112 degree day, which is every day, usually that would work there, and walking, it's almost 2 miles away back into this, you know, beautiful landscape of towering cliffs and whatever, with tombs hidden everywhere. To get a ride on a motorbike, I certainly, you know, took him up on it. And I've done it a few times, actually, so it's kind of fun.
Now, were these tombs deliberately hidden, or were they just eroded over the years and forgot about?
Were they, what was your word? I didn't hear it.
Were they deliberately hidden?
Oh, most definitely deliberately hidden, because tomb robbing was number one thing. And just about every tomb, I mean, was probably horrifically robbed, and the treasures were taken and put on the market, and who knows where they are today. Maybe we see some. And that's the reason why KV 62 is so very important, is because it wasn't really robbed in antiquity. It was broken into, but it looked like they may have been caught and someone got pretty scared and they just dropped the things on the way out in one of the corridors. So, yeah, I think that, you know, that's quite important for that particular tomb. It's just about all of them were robbed for one reason or the other. The recent work that I've done in a few of the tombs nearby, these tombs were sitting underneath a known village. And this was quite extraordinary because, you know, you have indication that it's there, and once they were excavated, you wouldn't believe what's underground. So, you know, whether they were being pilfered from thousands of years ago or whenever, the tombs are underneath villages. So, in answer to the other question, too, probably lots of hidden tombs.
Jan, what were the cultural reasons for moving from building the pyramids to the Valley of the Kings? And it seems like the tombs would have been cut into the hillside or built near the hillside. What's the explanation for that?
Well, pyramids look to be secure, but they weren't either. Again, they were broken into. I think that we're doing some investigation in the pyramids, but a pharaoh and a royal back then was always looking for the next best thing that could not be broken into, because don't forget, he's taking a lot of treasures with him to his afterlife, and in his belief would be using these. So pyramid didn't work, many other types didn't work. So then the idea of hiding the tombs back into cliffs and crevices, which worked for quite a while, which is why the Valley of the Kings was used. So a lot of it did work for a while, but eventually you have a big crew back in the early dynasties excavating a tomb, and you know somebody's going to want to go back and take something, probably.
Yeah, they believed it. They believed in taking it with them, didn't they?
Yeah, right. I mean, they wanted to take everything with them so they would have that life, because like I said, living in the next life is most important. And you know, probably it was a pretty meager, poor life for many of the ancients. And taking whatever they had with them assured them that they would have a peaceful time when they crossed over into the netherworld. And that's the basis of, you know, the Egyptian belief. So when someone came along to change all that, which was Tut's father, Akhenaten, you can imagine that would not be accepted, Gary.
Yeah. Jan, what's the tomb that has the long flight of like a ramp, and there's like different tiers that goes back to like a building carved into the side of the hill? Is that in?
I'm not sure. You mean KB9 or Ramses the Sixth? There's one that's way back that you go up a very, very big entryway, stairs.
Yeah, yeah, maybe that's it.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, it looks like there's a bunch of columns in the front. I just want, is that nearby in the Luxor area?
Yeah, well, if you mean KB2, that would be Ramses, let's see, 5th or 4th. And yes, that's also in the Valley of the Kings. Now, the Valley of the Kings is big. It's not just a bunch of tombs, you know, that you can go see. There's 2 different valleys, and they're mainly, which I wanted to mention, made up of wadis, which are, you know, big wadis actually are valleys, and they're these 2 main wadis are cut into the Valley of the Kings. But I think that might be the one that you mean.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've just seen the photos of it. I just wondered if, yeah, that was in the area.
Yes, it is in the area, and also KV5 is, which is what Kent Weeks excavated, finding over 100 sons of Ramses in those tombs. And that was closed when I was there, and I would imagine that somebody's double lifetime to finish excavating that. But I'd love to do it if I was offered. So there's a lot of tombs that are closed that, you know, you can't see, and there's ones that you can go into. I should mention probably the reason that this basically came up, and this is a controversial topic, is that this company called Factum d'Arte decided to make a replica of Tutankhamun's tomb. And they went in and scanned all the walls. Now, I'm not in favor of that at all. I do not believe in making replica tombs. They said, well, you know, because of the tombs, the moisture in is causing disintegration and all that. Well, I'd rather see the original or not see it at all. But to go into another facsimile of a tomb, to me, is looking at an artifact that someone has made that isn't authentic. So that's my personal opinion, you know, about that. A lot of people disagree, and then some agree. But that came about for this tomb and all of this whole new scenario theory because of scanning that tomb for a replica. And in those scans, they found ghost lines in the wall. So that, you know, was the beginning of the entire thing since I left Egypt. The week that I left Egypt, when I was standing in the tomb, as I mentioned, this announcement was made, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe." So that's what's going on, huh?
So Jan, some of these tombs are open. Are there tours that go out from Luxor that
Yes.
takes people? Oh, okay.
Yes, there are. What you can do is once you get there, usually if you stay in one of the modest places, I would suggest staying on the West Bank, which means you cross the Nile and you really stay where everything is. Your hotel can arrange for a guide, and you will tell them what tombs you want to see. There's a fee for seeing each tomb, and some people say it's a lot, but I think if you go to Egypt, what can be a lot if you want to see a famous tomb, right? So it's never, to me, out of the question. But they will take you to just about any site you want to go to, and even from Luxor, you can go to the pyramids. You can go to the other pyramids, the other archaeological sites. Some of them are a day trip away. Highly worth it. I mean, I would never not go to Egypt and not visit other sites. So there's a lot of possibility of what you could do when you're there, and what you could visit, and a lot of great temples and things that you really shouldn't miss, in my opinion.
Jan, how did you get the permission to work there? Is that do you get invited? Is it a complicated process? How would do you need certain credentials to do
Yes,
that?
you do. It's very complicated and difficult to get to work in Egypt, and in my career, I knew that I wanted to do that, so I knew that it would be important to have somewhat of an education and publish some things. And what you do is you get invited, probably if people know of what you do. Or if you want to go as a student, you can go for field work. And field work gets you on a team which your college or university would pay for. And you get to learn, a lot of archaeological techniques, excavating, curation, pottery analysis, lithic tools, all those things that, I really love to do. You would learn that and then go back to the university. Or in my case, if you're a little bit, older in your profession, you would get invited. Hence, I recently was invited to join the Spanish team from Canary Island, Spain, last season. My friend happens to be the director, and we worked together in the Valley of the Kings. So, he invited me, and I was very honored to be invited. And when a director does invite you, they put in paperwork to the National Security and the Antiquities Minister, and you have to fill out a form. It's very complicated and specific, and you either get picked or you don't. And I've been picked, so I have security clearance and most access to all sites to get into when I go to Egypt. So
Wow.
Feel very privileged to do that, and I can't say enough about how wonderful, kind the Egyptian people have always been to me, from your officials to your common village people. And there's one thing that my first time in Egypt, I always say, many of the villages, if you look around, it's very surreal. You think you're 5,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. And it looks just like it does in the book. And things are basic. And that's, how you live when you're there. And it gives you a great perspective of how other people and cultures live. And that's, how you live when you're there. And it gives you a great perspective of how other people and cultures live. And that's, how you live when you're there. And it gives you a great perspective of how other people and cultures live. And that's, how you live when you're there. And it gives you a great perspective of how other people and cultures live. And that's, how you live when you're there. And it gives you a great perspective of how other people and cultures live. And that's, how you live when you're there. And it gives you a great perspective of how other people and cultures live. And that's, how you live when you're there. And it gives you a great perspective of how other people and cultures live. And that's, how you live when you're there. And it gives you a great perspective of how other people and cultures live. And that's, how you live when you're there. And it gives you a great perspective of how other people and cultures live. And that's, how you live when you're there. And it gives you a great perspective of how other people and cultures live. And that's, how you live when you're there. And it gives you a great perspective of how other people and cultures live. And also live and what they do. You know, Egypt and many other countries are suffering a lot with, you know, different things going on and economically and whatever. So it's a big appreciation to see what we have here where we live that others don't. And the way I look at it, and I've also been told, you know, people have thanked me and said, well, thank you for coming to my country and help us uncover the prehistory and the archaeology, because what they do then is try to open the tomb for tourism, which helps promote the economy of that company, of that country. So that's the basis besides loving, you know, what I do.
So how many times have you been to Egypt?
I've worked on 4 different teams there at different times and been there 5 times.
So what is the most impressive artifact or place you've been there?
Wow, good question. Let's see. Well, I would say one of my best experiences is climbing up to the top of the Great Pyramid, the greatest pyramid in the world, the one in Giza, the Pyramid of Khufu. And I went there, wanted to go inside and see what the inside of the pyramid was like. I mean, I'm not really a pyramidologist or whatever. I don't have great expertise, but it certainly is a structure, a monument that is just, you know, awe-inspiring. You know, the 3 pyramids that sit in Giza, the largest one that was open at the time, I wanted to go up to the top chamber where they do a lot of electronic experiments, music, but you have to have special permission, of course. So I started to climb, and it's a straight metal rung ladder against the wall. And it's like 20 minutes you're bent over doing that. And you come to a little platform, and then you look down or you don't. And then you keep going up to the top chamber, and I, you know, felt that was a great experience of my life to be able to do that. And when I had gone into the pyramid to do it, there were some students behind us, and I turned around and they all decided not to. So I was totally alone climbing inside the pyramid. When I got to the top, there is just to see how that was constructed by stone and how they actually could carve out a top chamber like that with the sarcophagus was sitting there, sarcophagus being, you know, stone structure, sitting there broken and still not really knowing much about the history of that pyramid was really quite exciting. So I think that's probably one of my favorite and best times, besides being in KB 62 and being in that tomb, because since I've been 7 to 8 years old, that's what I've studied as a girl. You know, rocks, archaeology, tombs, and then being able to be in Tutankhamun's tomb for the first time was quite exciting. And also, I would say, when I worked at Mendes with the Penn State grad program with the students, when you're excavating, I excavated 9 ancient Egyptian burials, and this was from the 4th dynasty. These were the pyramid builders. So that's probably my second most. And when you excavate and see a burial, it's not like what you would see nowadays, because it usually would be wrapped in reed matting, and it's mostly white with you know, some little brown bone, and everything is meticulously taken out and bagged and cataloged and whatever. And we show great reverence when you do any excavation of a burial, because you have to remember this is someone's ancestor. and it's someone very important. And to me, it was very important. And many times when you're excavating with the team, the Egyptian team, you know, everyone stops to do some kind of prayer or some kind of, you know, acknowledgement, which I think is very nice.
Well, I think it's great that they can trace their history back like that. You know, it's awesome.
Well, DNA is a new thing that seems to be helping a lot in, you know, tracing history, going way back, finding records, finding, you know, hieroglyphs and things, and then finding who's related to who, right? So.
Yeah, it'd be nice if we could do more of that in the States.
You know, it really would. You know, I'm not sure. I guess it just takes the know-how and maybe the technology, which is just one more thing I wanted to mention was about the new technology that we're using. That we have time.
Sure.
Well, as I mentioned, you know, Carter was very advanced in his day in that he must have been meticulous and preserved and removed things. However, he didn't have the tools. He had the records and the same things we have nowadays. But nowadays we have GPR and we have this infrared thermography. Now, I haven't really been able and been you know, on a site to use any of it because we haven't really needed to. We knew what we were looking for, but I don't know too much about it, but I think basically GPR, they set up a unit and it receives electrical impulses and it sends it back to the ground, which comes back. And I was told the higher frequency of the antenna, shallower into the ground it penetrates. So a higher frequency would only see small targets. So I think that that's an important choice in doing that. And that's what the Japanese have done now in KV-62. They brought in Mr. Watanabe, who is an elderly gentleman, extremely expert. He has previously found hidden monuments in South America. And he took his radar machine and somehow adjusted it and ran along the wall and first came up with, you know, this first confirmation of the theory. Now, he's very well known, so anybody that, you know, kind of refuted it was kind of, yeah, well, you know, you're wrong. He is right. He said there's definitely things behind there. What there is and how we're going to see it is the next question, though. And then the infrared thermography, I'm not quite sure, but I also believe that has to do with the temperature and how that is scanned and what that can tell you, because I believe that has found the organic and metallic objects that are behind that wall. So that's what we're, you know, dealing with right now as far as the tomb, seeing what might be behind there. And I think the scans, really what they show, it's the first time we're actually seeing the physicality of the wall of the tomb. You know, if you look at the paintings, you can see things, but you don't really see what was behind it and what maybe was there and then covered up. And that's probably what may have happened in Tut's tomb, actually. So we found chiseled lines in the ceiling, different features on the walls, and all of this shows physical evidence that something else was going on in this tomb. And don't forget, since 1922, everybody, including myself, has researched, written all about this tomb, never knowing this, that there may be a tomb beneath a tomb, which is probably my phrase I might use if I write, an article on it.
We ain't got but a minute or two left. Did Mark say you had an article coming out in Ancient American Magazine, or that you write for Ancient American Magazine?
Yes, there is. There is one that came out. Actually, came out at the same time. My article on what we're talking about now is in Ancient Egypt magazine, and that's the top magazine for Egyptology. But the Ancient American article I did is one of the artifacts in the museum where I work. It's something I've always loved, and it's a Zuni, a stone fetish mountain lion. And that's the article that's in there currently. And everybody knows many people have carved fetishes that you can hold in your hand. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But this one is actually takes all my weight to hold it. And it's as big as my forearm, and there's quite a good picture of it in the magazine if anyone can find it. And I kind of described a little bit about how important the fetish is to the Zuni culture. And this little, not little thing, but it actually, I think he weighs 11 pounds. I carried him across campus to weigh him. And he is very unusual in that I think he may hold a lot of spiritual Zuni power because he is so heavy. And we don't have much provenance on him at all, but it's quite an interesting object in our collection. So.
Okay, can people go to the Orma J. Smith Museum and see it?
Yes, you can. If you ask me, I'll show you anything. We have a museum that has a lot of different sciences, and it's a little known treasure of the whole Northwest United States.
Okay, folks. We're back, folks. I hope you enjoyed the first half of the show. I want to remind everybody we got a special to the end of the month. If you donate $50, you get a 1 ounce silver bar, and that's the U.S. only, by the way. I believe continental USA, but you can check with Hawk about Alaska and Hawaii. And it's a great deal. You get something for your donations, and we get a little donation. And really, this is the only way we bring shows like this is if you donate. If not, you're going to hear dead air. What do you think of that, Mark? Dead air.
Don't like it.
No, I didn't either. Though we keep stepping in it, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah, that happens. Even with all the show planning we do, we still have dead air. But yeah, so just to prevent dead air, we'll just go right into our next guests. Returning to discuss more aspects of Giantology is Jason Jarrell, and I think we're going to hear from a special guest who's with him. Is Sarah there?
I'm here.
Okay, yay. Okay, and you can follow Jason and Sarah's work on AlleghenyMounds.com. And Jason, Sarah, your feet thawing out?
Yes, at long last, I can feel my toes again.
Okay. Remember, we can't say anything about that, though.
Oh, my lips are sealed, but I can think of a couple of state-sanctioned archaeologists that are going to feel pretty stupid.
Let's give them. We'll be discussing that shortly. But yeah, yeah, you two have a new article in Ancient American Magazine, and you are covering some excavations in Doddridge County, West Virginia. And that doesn't seem like a typical Adena necropolis or habitation site. So, Sarah, what motivated you to go into this a little bit more interior region and dig around for some hidden history?
Well, we found some microfilm at a local library that had an article about the mounds from Doddridge, and we kind of went from there trying to verify whether the article was being completely truthful or not. In June 15th of 1930, the Clarksburg Daily ran an article about mounds on the farm of Benjamin Zane, and this is in Morganville, not to be confused with Morgantown, and it's about 12 miles west of Salem. Now, the article mentions Professor Ernest Sutton of Salem University carrying out these excavations. The article mentions a now vanished race as being found in the mounds. And Sutton himself said that the particular tribe that inhabited that section of the state of West Virginia is believed to have been composed of individuals ranging from 7 to 9 feet tall.
Okay, those are some pretty big figures. Are the do these newspaper articles seem accurate?
Well, the second article we found was in the Charleston Gazette.
Okay.
The title of that was Salem Professor Discovers Huge Skeletons in Mounds, and it also ran on the same day as the other article, June 15th of 1930. Now, the Gazette article says that the mounds contained what Professor Sutton, head of history department of the Salem College, believed was a valuable evidence of a race of giants who inhabited that part of West Virginia about 1,000 years ago or longer. And it says in that article as well, 7 to 9 feet tall.
Now, Mark,
Yeah.
as regards the accuracy of these articles, what Sarah and I were able to do was to actually test and cross-reference an account of an excavation like this with data that actually existed regarding this mound site. To begin with, the press articles all mention that Sutton had sent the artifacts from the mounds to the Smithsonian Institution. And the first thing we did was check the acquisitions records of the Smithsonian. And it turns out that the same artifacts mentioned in the newspaper articles are listed. They're handwritten in the ledger for the acquisition books of the Smithsonian. And they're dated to July the 9th, 1930. And they're listed as having been donated by Ernest Sutton and Oris Stutler. So there's no question that these mounds existed, and the artifacts were sent to the Smithsonian, and they were excavated by Ernest Sutton. And Sutton himself published a paper about these excavations in the West Virginia Archaeologist in 1958. And it's important to take note that that was 29 years after the newspaper articles published in 1930.
Mm-hmm.
So, according to Sutton, in his printed report on the mounds, they were located on a hilltop above the village of Morgansville. And the report mentions the discovery of 4 skeletons in one of the mounds and a single skeleton in the other mound. And strangely enough, there are no measurements given for the skeletons in the actual report, although it does say that an assistant who was aiding Sutton in the excavations, named Paige Lockhart, collected the bones of one of these skeletons and took them home.
Okay. So there's one of the skeletons went home with one person, and after the excavation was done, about 6 weeks later, the Smithsonian took possession of the artifacts and other skeletons.
Well, what we learned was that the excavation that Sutton had done was actually done in 1929. And then on June the 14th of 1930, Sutton was a professor at Salem College. And on June the 14th, 1930, he gave some type of conference and told the press about his discovery of these gigantic skeletons from the mounds. And the Smithsonian collected the artifacts because they're in their own books and they're mentioned as coming from the mounds, and both press articles mention Sutton's intention to send his finds at the mounds to the Smithsonian Institution. So it's a fair bet that the skeletal material that wasn't taken from the site may have gone to the Smithsonian.
Okay. And you make a note of one of the burials, and this is what corroborated with both newspapers, is that one of the bodies was hermetically sealed in clay.
That's correct.
So if it sounds like the body was hardened. So heating bones might cause it not a little bit, but not 9 to 9 feet tall.
Well, if you read the newspaper articles carefully, both articles mention 2 measured skeletons.
Mm-hmm.
One of these is 7'6" and the other is 9 feet tall. In Sutton's own report, he specifically mentioned that of all the burials at the site, only 2 skeletons were intact for sufficient measurement. So that corroborates 2 separate measurements from the newspaper archives, and one of those was the skeleton sealed in clay. Now, another instance of an Adena skeleton sealed in clay is from the Great Smith Mound in Charleston, and the skeleton that was sealed in a type of clay there also was 7'6", and it was excavated by the Smithsonian in 1883. So this may have been a method of preservation that was used for certain elite individuals. And another amazing aspect of these newspaper articles is that if you cross-reference the artifacts and the stratigraphy of the mounds themselves as they're outlined in the newspaper articles, they are absolutely correct with the actual data in the report. So in this one instance, at least, we can say that the information in the newspaper articles is accurate.
Okay. And it was done by a college professor. That brings a credibility to the excavation.
Well, I'd actually like to share some more information we were able to dig up regarding Ernest Sutton. and
Okay.
and the skeletal material. As I mentioned before, his official report, was not filed until 1958. That's a considerable amount of time that passed since the mounds were actually excavated, and the newspaper articles, which appeared in 1930. Now, Sutton himself actually went on to perform a number of excavations on Adena mounds and Hopewell mounds throughout West Virginia and Ohio. In fact, I consider him to have been one of the people who really laid the foundations for collecting data on these cultures. And there's an interesting thing that occurs in the 1960s. Between September of 1962 and October of 1963, Ernest Sutton excavated the Johnson-Thompson Mound in Athens County, Ohio. Now, for some reason, the Ohio Historical Society would not publish his report until 1966 in the Ohio Archaeologist. And our research into this mound, the Johnson-Thompson Mound, turned up a letter that was written by Ernest Sutton and sent to Martha Potter and Raymond S. Bobby of the Ohio Historical Society about some issues with his report from the Johnson-Thompson Mound. And in this letter, he states, and this is a quote, "The Johnson-Thompson Mound report has been revised in conformity with instructions and is now returned." And he also mentions in this letter, "I note some question by both you," that's Martha Potter, "and Dr. Bobby regarding my measurement of burials and what formula I use. By examination and checking, I find that the length of the femur bone is approximately 1/3 of the total length." Now, this letter is dated for March 21st, 1966, and this means that Sutton, up to that point, had determined the length of skeletons by the femur representing 1/3 of the total length. But Sarah has found that this is actually an error and not the proper way to gauge the height of a skeleton by the femur.
That's right. He was measuring 1/3, which would be 33.3 of the total height. But a lot of scientists that actually measure today, and even back then, it's more like 1/4 of the total height of an individual, sometimes a ratio of 1 to 3.5. That puts us off by about 8% of overall height. So for the 7.5 footer, you're looking at least maybe 5 inches, 6 inches taller than that if he was basing his measurement off of it being 1/3. Now, the 9 footer can grow 8 inches off of that percentage. So
He was
they may
underestimating.
he was underestimating it, and they may have been quite a bit taller than he even recorded.
Now, what's interesting is that letter was in response to problems that Raymond S. Bobby had with his report for the Johnson-Thompson Mound. And the actual published report that was finally released in 1966 for that mound, it features numerous measurements for burials in the mound, except for 2 burials that were in the northeast corner. And even though the measurements are not given for those 2 burials, they are mentioned as being in excellent condition and they are extended burials. There's absolutely no reason why the other burials in this mound should have been measured and these two excluded. So we believe that what we have here is clear feedback between an archaeologist and the Ohio Historical Society, where this individual was asked to leave certain details of an excavation report out of the printed literature. And that is why the Johnson-Thompson Mound report was postponed for 3 years.
So that's what the revised in conformity with instructions means?
That's correct.
Does it imply coercion?
Well, for a researcher like Sutton, who did the work that he did, by the way, because he loved what he did. We've actually spoken with some of his surviving family members. Getting your research published was everything. And it's our theory that at the time that he excavated the mounds in Doddridge County, which was in 1929, Ernest Sutton may have been initially unaware of the policy of denial enacted under the authority of Elis Hrdlicka of the Smithsonian regarding the reporting of gigantic skeletons, and therefore may have openly discussed those findings with the press because he may have felt they were very important to the history of anthropology. And then later, in the 60s, he was having to deal with Raymond Bobby and Martha Potter at the Ohio Historical Society, and Raymond S. Bobby is infamous for the destruction that he has wrought upon the prehistory of North America with some of the methods that he himself used for excavating mounds, losing artifacts, and destroying burials before they could even be properly measured.
Okay. Now, Sarah, there's a notebook that you wanted to discuss. Now, is that just a continuation of Jason's information that he was just discussing, or is this a different topic?
Well, I'll let her talk about the notebook after I tell you how we found it, because there's a couple of details there you're going to find interesting, Mark.
All right, lay it on us.
Well, after we found all this paperwork that we've been discussing on these mounds, we decided to conduct an on-the-ground investigation in Doddridge County and interview people and try to speak with some of the people that lived in the area at the time that these excavations occurred. And the first thing we did was try to track down Sutton's work at Salem University, because we thought that maybe some of his research material could be there. And what we found was that Salem University had sent their material to the Grave Creek Mound Museum. Well, the people at the Grave Creek Mound Museum treated us and the other people who were working with us on this like we were aliens for even suggesting that we have access to the research material of a local archaeologist. So we were forced to go through other channels. And eventually, while we were making inquiries in Doddridge County, we made contact with a very credible anonymous source. And the anonymous source explained to us that in the 1960s, Sutton had returned to Doddridge and performed a second excavation on one of the mounds. And during this investigation, another gigantic skeleton had been found. And just as in 1929, an individual who assisted in this excavation stole that skeleton. And this person's family later sold the remains to a wealthy Western buyer.
Hmm. So, do we know who the buyer is?
We don't know.
We don't know who the buyer is. Our source would not say the name, but we got the impression it was a certain wealthy family who, I believe, if you were to investigate some of the numerous newspaper articles on giants found in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia, you may find this name mentioned several times. Apparently, some philanthropies in the United States had more than a passing interest into the contents of these mounds at the turn of the century.
Okay. All right, so, Sarah, do you want to talk about the notebook?
Sure.
Now it's might want to just leave the name out of the who purchased the skeleton. So
Oh, sure.
yeah,
Of
just
course.
move on to the notebook so we don't incriminate ourselves any further.
Okay, well, the notebook was Sutton's day-to-day log of his second set of excavations at the Zane Farm mounds. And it was recorded from the last day of May in 1960 to July of the same year. On his July 6th entry, he mentions a possible burial area had been found, and the newly discovered tomb was very close to the mound that was excavated 31 years ago.
Now, that's the same mound from the newspaper articles, and the notebook mentions the individual that our source claimed stole this particular gigantic skeleton numerous times. And the unfortunate fact is that the last few pages of the notebook had been torn out and destroyed. And so we made inquiries as to the notebook's history. And the only person to have had this notebook in their possession between Sutton's own family and the Doddridge County Historical Society, which has it today, was Edward McMichael, the state archaeologist of West Virginia. And McMichael, among giantologists, he's a notorious giants denier. In several Adena excavations in the 1960s, McMichael literally changed the measurements of skeletons in the same report that they're mentioned in, shrinking them down. So it's very possible that our source was correct and another giant was found in these mounds in 1960, and the giant was taken. And when the notebook passed to the state archaeologist, he destroyed the last few pages to conceal the fact of what had been found at the site.
Well, in the Murad Mound article McMichael wrote, he discusses the weight of mounds could have smushed the skeletons into longer proportions. What do you think about that possibility from a state archaeologist?
Well, I think that in a universe such as the one we live in, things like that may happen somewhere, but they don't happen on this planet because gravity's not strong enough to add stature to a dead body, especially when it's simply bones. With regards to the tombs of this culture, the mounds excavated by Ernest Sutton, one contained a megalithic tomb made of stone that protected that skeleton. Another of the skeletons was contained in a casing of clay, and the gigantic skeletons from Charleston, West Virginia, that you'll find in the 12th annual report of the Bureau of Ethnology, many of them were found inside log cabins that were built inside the mounds, and they were completely protected. So I find McMichael's explanation highly dubious. Unfortunately for McMichael's work, most of his archaeology has been discredited by more recent research in the Ohio River Valley.
Why is McMichael wanting to deny giants? What's his motivation?
Well, McMichael was actually assigned the job of being West Virginia's state archaeologist in the 1960s. West Virginia did not have an archaeological movement per se before the 1960s. And when McMichael came into the Kanawha River Valley, he was dealing with the single most diverse manifestation of the Adena culture on record. So his job was to create a pigeonhole into which archaeologists could place West Virginia Adena. And by the 1960s, state archaeologists, remember who they really work for, the word state is in there for a reason, were well aware of the government-sanctioned paradigm that by then had taken over American archaeology. And that's one reason for being a giants denier. The policy of denial regarding these beings that was began by Elis Hrdlicka in the 1920s had become a state-sponsored paradigm, and that's how it found its way into the university circuit.
So, since you're covering so much of the local prehistory, what do the local historians have to say about your work?
Well, while we were in Doddridge County, everyone that we spoke to, just about everyone, knew about gigantic skeletons from the burial mounds. Here in West Virginia, it's really not much of a secret, to be honest with you. In fact, we've spoken to several people who believe that it's actually the Nephilim. You know, people here even have their own theories as to what these beings were. But here where we live, near Charleston, the museum curators and antiquarians that we've met are 100% supportive of our work, because many of them have attempted to discuss this data even from an establishment viewpoint. There are a couple of museums in the area where the people who work there know about these types of discoveries in the Adena mounds, and most of them are just looking for answers the same way as other people do.
Okay, so what do you think about the biblical accuracy of the giants? Are you finding that what was in the Doddridge County mounds actually supports biblical characters like Goliath?
Well, by some measurements, I've seen Goliath described as 8.5 feet tall. It's all a matter of what type of cubit measurement was being used. But one of the questions that we receive very often is, how tall were these people? How tall? What was the greatest height that they achieved? With the Ohio River Valley, most of the Adena that were gigantic were between 7 and 8 feet tall. And there are occasional 9-footers, as we believe Sutton discovered in one of the mounds, but there's something very important about the mound in Doddridge that had the 9-foot tall skeleton. The artifacts in that mound included a Middle Archaic banner stone. Banner stones are not Adena artifacts. Banner stones date to the preceding time period. So, with this instance, the larger skeleton is demonstrably older than the skeleton at the same site who was in a different mound that was 7'6" that was buried with Adena artifacts. And a part of our work, a part that we're planning to publish in our book, is to place all these random giants reports with their proper culture based on shreds of information that are in the report, such as what types of artifacts they're found with, what region they're found in. And what we found is that there's an earlier horizon that dates to around 1,500 years before the Adena. And in this horizon, giants that are associated with this culture sometimes reach heights of 9, 10, or even 11 feet tall. So this, to answer your question about biblical chronology, in the Bible, if you look at the measurements of some of the giants as time passes, they actually get smaller. And it seems that it may be possible to demonstrate that in the archaeological record in North America also.
So you're saying that the date of the giants flourishing in America needs to be pushed back to an earlier time period?
It may be impossible to know the oldest time period, but I am certainly suggesting that by 2500 BC, there were giants in North America. And the artifacts that the larger giants are found with date to between 4,500 BC and 1400 BC. These are archaeological horizons that drastically predate the woodland period cultures that are more famous and better known for the Adena giants.
Well, that makes sense, since a lot of the giants seem like they were the primary burials and were at or just below ground level. So that could show that they were buried first, and that they would be older, maybe dating back to the Archaic period.
Well, this actually gets into something that has been happening in North American archaeology over the last few years. If you went back to the 1970s, you would be operating under the idea that pottery and burial mounds in Eastern North America didn't go back to any time earlier than 500 BC. If you published the discovery of pottery or burial mounds before that time period, you'd have been destroyed by peer review. But now we know that burial mounds in the Deep South date back to 4,000 and 3,500 BC. In the Mississippi drainage, they date to 2,600 BC. Many of the mounds in Ohio date to 1,900, 1,400, and 2,400 BC. And this mound, which the newspaper reports seem to imply contained a 9-foot tall skeleton, had artifacts of the earlier period, such as the archaic banner stone.
So this is a pretty large culture then, right?
Yes, sir. This culture went through numerous phases and incarnations in a period of time that spanned multiple thousands of years, and they were not confined to North America. We believe that at some point in the deep past, there were people who were able to travel the world, and these individuals may have founded lineages all over the planet who started cultures just like this one. In North America, the archaeological data now suggests that by 4000 BC, there was a sophisticated culture that stretched from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to southern Ontario, who exchanged ideas, metal, artifacts, and shell. They identified themselves with exquisitely carved bone pins. And this is from a time period when, until a few years ago, archaeologists believed that these people didn't even know where their next meal was coming from. So for all the people who believed that there were very advanced civilizations in the deep past, it's in the archaeological record. The sooner that people like ourselves become scholars, the sooner we begin to learn what's actually there for us, the sooner we'll get to the bottom of the mystery of humanity's history.
But why do you think they want to hide this truth from people? I see no problem accepting it myself, but they seem to think it would cause some kind of problems or something.
Well, that's a great question. And in our book, we're going to be devoting approximately 1/4 of our book to giving people all the reasons why the establishment would have motive to do this, to conceal this. The question really isn't why they would. The question is why they wouldn't. If there were very advanced global civilizations in the deep past, and those civilizations failed catastrophically, that certainly would cause people to question how wonderful an idea globalization really was. And we're living in an era of globalization. The other aspect of this is the type of economy and political system these beings controlled North America through. And that's another aspect of our research that's yielded astounding results. Because we now know that by the late Archaic period, the economy in North America was controlled by dynastic lineages who essentially worked to create a form of archaic communism. They were controlling the distribution of essential goods and resources. And this type of economy, it's known in European archaeology as a Bronze Age political economy, was happening contemporaneously with an identical socioeconomic system in Atlantic Europe. And I think that that's far too significant to be a coincidence. Furthermore, and this is a part of our belief system, the best way to control a population is to control what they believe. And biblical history, mythology, and the oral tradition of the Native Americans, for example, these are things that make people look upward. These are things that make people aspire. They're inspirational. And they add a dimension to life that is so far beyond the material. If you wanted to control an entire population, you may want to remove the validity of those things to keep people's eyes on the ground. And we believe that that's probably one of the greatest motives.
Okay. Redirect people. Don't look at the man behind the curtain.
Well, let me put that another way. A lot of people are unaware of the fact that one of the greatest pieces of evidence for Darwinism moving from being a theory to supposedly proven was Piltdown Man. Now, if you'll do some homework on Piltdown Man, you'll find that it was proven to be an elaborate hoax.
That sat in a museum for over 40 years.
That's correct. And with regards to these giants that we're talking about now, and also other anomalies from around the world, like the Paracas crania, these are all discoveries which fly in the face of Darwinism. These people had a superior physical state to ours today. They had great longevity. Some of the Indian traditions speak of people living for hundreds of years during this period. They obviously had, some of them, superior mental development because the cranial capacity of many Adena are greater than modern man. So this data certainly defies the Darwinian paradigm. And it's very interesting that they fight so hard to hide it, while supposedly the greatest piece of evidence on behalf of Darwinism is a known fraud.
Okay. So, Sarah, what's your favorite mound? What is in it that makes these cases for you?
Well, I guess I'm kind of partial to the Creole Mound myself. Maybe it's because I live very close to it, but the most intriguing thing to me about the Creole Mound is the volunteer burials around the central figure. And they're buried in such a way that they go out like spokes on a wheel, and it's pretty obvious to me that they all made it into the mound at the same time. And I think the central figure was the person that died and actually got the mound. So those were his volunteer servants, and that's very intriguing to me.
Okay, fine. And you also did a recent trip to study some petroglyphs. Did they have anything to do with mounds or the Adena culture?
Yes.
Okay.
Without going too far into it, this is going to be part of our next article for Ancient American. But many of the Adena mounds had cup-marked slabs in them. Norris talks about cup-marked slabs at intersections of graded ways. And the glyphs that we went to study were cup marks. And they're less than 2 miles away from the Creole Mound. So we'll be writing an article about that soon. It should come out in the June issue.
So did you see any of the graded ways?
Not in the Charleston area. They're all gone around here. But in Ohio at Marietta, you can actually see parts of the Sacravia that goes to the river. And it's kind of strange because there's streets cutting into it and some of it's in people's yards. But if you have a discerning eye, you can still see pieces of it.
Okay. So did the cup marks have any kind of like Orion's belt type patterns on it, as people may have been walking on these graded ways or passing by there? What do you think they mean?
Well, the the cup marks are a universal symbol of megalithic culture around the world, Mark. There are numerous Adena mounds which contain cup-marked slabs,
Mm-hmm.
and these same cup-marked slabs are found in burial mounds in Europe that some of them actually date to roughly the same time period. The cup and ring marks were at one time considered the ultimate symbol of megalithic culture. And what Sarah's done is she's found numerous sites around the Charleston area which include megaliths with these cup marked stones. And when we visit these sites, the first thing we do is investigate the entire mountain and the valleys to make sure there aren't other stones with similar patterns. And then what's occurring now is we're cross-referencing several different sites to do something similar to what you suggested and to attempt to discern at least one possible interpretation of a group of these markings.
I think you have a few examples in the Kilmartin Valley in Scotland of these cup marked stones. So that's, just little supportive evidence of what you're saying of megalithic cultures. We're leaving those, wherever they traveled.
Well, they appear on all the major standing megaliths in Europe, and we've found several sites in West Virginia. 2 of them are acknowledged as archaeological sites, and we've found megalithic stones that are still standing that feature these same symbols, and we'll be publishing that information in Ancient American as well.
Okay. And is Marcia going to be illustrating the next one?
Well, we always invite her to embellish our work in any way that she sees fit. Certainly the next article will probably feature a piece of hers because it actually gives us an opportunity to let Marcia do something a little abstract. And I think we're going to invite her to do something in that regard.
Okay. And what do you have new on your website?
Well, we archive all of our articles and interviews on the website. When we know a release date for our book, as soon as it's finished, we're going to have a countdown on our website. And every day we'll be sharing really, really interesting information from the book each day as we count down to the release.
Say out your website address before we get bumped.
Yeah, it's AlleghenyMounds.com. Allegheny is ALLEGHENY.
Wanted to make sure you got it in there before the music cuts off.
Okay, I'm trying to get it into the chat room. There we go.
There it is. Hope you enjoyed the show tonight, folks. And y'all remember, we're totally listener supported. Thank y'all for joining us and enlightening us this evening.
I hope Brittany enjoyed the show.